Welcome, everyone. I'm Candace Badgett. My husband and I, we built and we operate the Raj Ayurveda Health Center in Fairfield, Iowa, where we offer the therapies of Ayurveda, 6,000-year-old system of medicine, and these therapies are referred to as Panchakarma. And Panchakarma is an amazingly powerful approach to prevention, to treating and addressing chronic disorders, to removing stress and fatigue, and just giving everyone a great reset. It's an amazing system of medicine. It's the longest continuously practiced system of medicine in the world. So today, we have the great honor of having as our speaker with us today in our conversation and interview, Dr. John Salerno. We're so happy to have you with us. And I just want to give a brief introduction here so that everyone knows who you are and all that you've done. Dr. Salerno is a researcher affiliated with the Institute for Prevention Research in Maharishi Vedic City. And this is where he works, focusing on integrative and Ayurvedic approaches to cardiovascular health and prevention. He's also the co-author of a randomized clinical trial investigating the effects of traditional Ayurvedic formulas on vascular function, contributing to a growing body of research, bringing classical Ayurvedic knowledge, bridging this beautiful Ayurvedic knowledge, very traditional, very ancient, 6,000 years old, and bridging that with modern science. And John has published more than 35 papers, and we're just thrilled to have you here today. And John, I want to start out by telling a little story that got me so interested in tracking you down and having you join us. I was speaking to a friend who was talking about the fact that many years ago, maybe back in the early 80s, there was a newsletter that had gone out from the International TM organization. And there was a transcript from a talk that Maharishi had given, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, the founder of Transcendental Meditation, talking about the fact that Ayurveda was very important for long, healthy life and for gaining higher states of consciousness. Now, at this point, Maharishi had not begun the whole revival of Ayurveda and really bringing the Vaidya's, the traditional Ayurvedic doctors, here to the university here and beginning all the research. But this friend of mine, they were so excited about this comment, this little comment that had been made in this newsletter, that they went and they tracked down Charaka Sanghita, which is the main text of Ayurveda. And they began reading through that entire text. And at one point, they came across something that said, you should cover the body with sesame oil. And he continued to read on through the whole thing, and never, ever in Charaka Sanghita was any other oil mentioned, only sesame oil. And so he began doing this massage with sesame oil, and he's been doing it ever since. And this man is 85 years old and is playing pickleball and continuing in his very busy career. I think he got a jump start on it before any of the rest of us did. But this really inspired me to go find Dr. Salerno and ask him to come on and tell us all about, because the other key thing here is that John did his PhD on sesame oil. So he is indeed a great expert on sesame oil. So John, I want you to just start right in and start enlightening us about the healing power of sesame oil.
Hey, great. First of all, I just want to say thank you, Candace, for having me here on your show here today and enlightening the audience who's always eager to learn more about Ayurveda. So sesame oil. Yeah. I started my dissertation research way back in the late 80s. And my mentor, Dr. Edward Smith, was one of the first Western trained licensed medical doctors to get trained in Ayurveda by the Vaidya's, came here to MIU. He also was interested in doing some initial studies of Ayurveda. And he knew that I was looking around for a project to do for my PhD. I just graduated with a master's, and I had a lot of training in tissue culture work and cell biology, working in a laboratory. And so I thought, let's do some pioneering work in Ayurveda. Let's take one of their modalities or therapies and see if we can apply it in vitro, in other words, in tissue culture. So we knew that sesame oil was mentioned in the Charaka, and we knew that it was, considered the king of oils, talam, as it's called in Sanskrit. I think it's spelled Tailam, talam. You go to a lot of Ayurvedic stores and you'll see talam, talam means sesame. And so there were some studies that were done on the cytotoxicity of cancer cells of different tissue types. And this was work that was done by David Horobin at the FML Research Institute in Nova Scotia. And also there was some pioneering work in Ayurveda on sesame oil gargle by Dr. Martha Stevens at Wichita State University back in also the late 80s, about the time that I was getting started. But what we wanted to do was to break down the components of sesame oil and see what was different about sesame oil compared to other oils. And in tissue culture, you have to do that with breaking it down with an enzyme called lipase in order to get it into cells. I should mention that sesame oil falls under the category of polyunsaturated fatty acids. And for most vegetable oils, about 95% are in the triglyceride form. We all heard triglycerides, right? We don't.
Not enough. You have to explain what polyunsaturated means.
Right. Well, just
triglycerides mean.
1 minute in biochemistry. Triglycerides are comprised of a glycerol molecule that binds 3 fatty acids. And in saturated fatty acids, those carbon chains are actually bound. But in unsaturated fatty acids, they're open, but they're also vulnerable to oxidation. That's why you can't.
All right. So, John, you have to explain to us why it's good. In other words, it's hard to understand the chemical makeup, but what we want to know is, why is polyunsaturated good? In other words, what does it do to the body that's a good thing?
Yeah, if you don't heat it too high when cooking, which recommended, saturated fatty acids are better in that respect. But what we did, based on the research by Horobin, we took 2 different cell lines. We took a malignant skin cell line, melanoma, and we took normal skin cells. And we also did colon cells. We also looked at normal colon cells and malignant or cancerous colon cells. So we first wanted to see whether there was anti-neoplastic properties in sesame oil. In other words, any cancer properties.
Oh, anti-cancer, because we don't know what neoplastic means.
Anti-neoplastic is the technical term for anti-cancer.
Okay, very good. We want those layman terms. Thank you.
Right. So we proceeded to do probably 2.5 years, 3 years, including writing up my dissertation, studying these different cell types in tissue culture, and other studies that also were done in tissue culture using different vegetable oils containing polyunsaturated fatty acids. They found that there was a selective anti-cancer effect. In other words, the cancer cells are more vulnerable to the uptake of these fatty acids, and particularly one called linoleic acid. And that was the one that the previous researchers, as well as I, confirmed was the one that seemed to be contributing to the selective effect on normal and cancer cells. In other words, the melanoma cells, when we use the range that would be typical for cell culture, say from 3 micrograms per milliliter up to 100 micrograms per milliliter, along the whole dosage range, you would see an increase in cell inhibition of the cancerous cells in tissue culture relative to the normal cells. And we would control for uptake rates, and we would control for the number of cells that we plate.
Okay, John, you
see
have to let me summarize and make sure that
Yeah,
Okay, so what you're saying is that with sesame oil, it was very selective. So it was having an impact on the cancer cells that were detrimental, but it was not having a detrimental effect on the normal cells. Is that what you're saying?
right. The major outcome was cell growth inhibition.
Cell
And
growth inhibition in the cancer cells alone.
Yeah, in other words, if you see the equal number of cells that control for uptake rates, when you inject the lipase digested oil, say sesame oil, we compared several oils, by the way. We compared safflower oil. We compared mineral oil, which is a non-vegetable oil. We compared sunflower oil, olive oil. So there were several that we compared it. We just did not use sesame oil. But we were most interested in sesame oil, whether it came out to be more selective. Now, the selective is very important in cancer treatment, as we know. Chemotherapeutic drugs, if they're not selective enough, they'll not only inhibit the growth of cells, normal cells in your body, even though they may be more detrimental to cancer cells, but selectivity, if the difference is small, then it's not as selective and it's not as good a drug to use.
Because then
there outweigh the benefits.
Then there are side effects. Exactly.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
So and also when you're saying that you did a lot of research with other oils, you weren't finding the same anti-cancer impact, especially in this value of being very selective in inhibiting the growth of cancer cells, but not inhibiting the growth of the normal cells. And therefore, you're saying that the sesame oil was by far more beneficial in this study, comparing many different kinds of oils in terms of its anti-cancer property.
Yeah, that's right. The second one that's pretty close was safflower oil. That's interesting because safflower oil is a polyunsaturated containing oil that is not recommended in Ayurveda to be used for frying or at high temperatures because it's vulnerable to oxidation.
I have a question about that.
Yeah.
Because if sesame oil is a polyunsaturated oil, we heat it a lot. And so how is it that it's not so vulnerable to being heated? Because we bring it up to basically the same temperature as boiling water in order to cure the oil before we use it. So how does it have, it's polyunsaturated, and yet it seems to hold up to higher heat? So can you
That's
comment?
a very good question. Very good question. I've been doing some further research because when I received my PhD and showed the selective effect of sesame oil and other oils, and then we're comparing apples to apples and oranges to oranges. In other words, previous researchers used very different tissue types, kidney and lung and so forth, but they didn't compare normal and malignant cells of the same tissue type side by side. In other words, what we did to further the knowledge in the area, which was in the pioneering stage way back then, 30 years ago, was we compared apples to apples. In other words, if you're going to look at the anti-cancer effects of sesame oil in tissue culture, you want to look at normal malignant cells of the same cell type. So we looked at skin cells and we looked at colon cells because we know that one of the major applications of sesame oil is in Bosties.
Right.
Which is considered topical, it's considered outside.
I do want to clarify for some of our new people that Bosties are enemas. It's part of the purification, detoxification component of the Panchakarma treatments. So yes, there are the 3 areas where we use it, which we'll go into soon. But I want to come back to this heating component.
Yeah.
Why it is we can safely heat up sesame oil to a very high degree and still have it not compromised in its healing?
Yeah, it was later research years after I got my doctorate here. There are what are called lignans, Lignans. Lignans are very powerful antioxidants. Polyphenols is another name for them. And in sesame oil, they have unique ones that aren't found in any other vegetable oil anywhere in the world.
Okay.
Sesame,
All right.
sesamolin, and
Sesamino.
sesamino, right? There's several of them actually like that. And is in high concentrations. I should also mention that sesame seed.
Wait. I want to connect the dots here. And that is, so are you explaining that then these lignans that are in no other oil,
Right.
are these responsible for maintaining the integrity of the oil, even though it's polyunsaturated,
Right.
even though it is heated to such a high temperature? These are the elements that kind of save the day here.
Yeah, these unique components of sesame oil, and there's a whole class of them, aren't found in other vegetable oils, even ones with high linoleic acid. We looked at linoleic acid in tissue culture by itself as a drug, separated. And we also looked at lipase digested sesame oil. And lipase digested sesame oil did just as well as the active component, linoleic acid. But even though there was a selective effect, later research found that these lignans, sesamin, sesamolin, and so forth, were the ones that really were doing giving a lot of other health benefits. They found studies on cardiovascular health. It's not just healthy skin. They probably are contributing also to helping sesame oil penetrate the skin. As Badgett say, it goes all the way to the bone marrow. So sesame oil's unique property is that it, perhaps with these unique components, which give it shelf life, but it has other health benefits besides the polyunsaturated fatty acids, of which 90% is linoleic acid.
I want to come back to that point that it's so penetrating, that it penetrates to the bone marrow. Now, one of the roles, my understanding, the role of sesame oil as a carrier oil, that all the oils that we're using in treatment and with Abhyanga, usually these oils are oils that have been cured with specific herbs. So not only is the oil and all its own healing properties penetrating to the bone, but so are the herbs, the essence of these herbs that are cured, or you could say boiled for a long period of time in the oil. So you've now extracted the healing essence of those herbs, and that's also penetrating so deeply to the bone. And I'm so curious as to what you have discovered or may have discovered that allows sesame oil to be so penetrating. Does it come back to the lignans again? Are they kind of the magic that's there in the sesame oil that allows it to have its integrity at high heat, even though it's polyunsaturated, allows it to penetrate more deeply than any other oil?
Yeah, I think these are contributing. I think, the whole concept of the whole being greater than the sum of the parts, synergy. There's a synergistic effect that takes place in sesame oil, I think, among these lignans and other components. There are other tocopherols, vitamin E, and so forth. Once again, vitamin E is found in other vegetable oils, but
all of this together. This is such a beautiful point, John. And I just love, I learned this from a number of the Vajas, that it's this holistic, synergistic intelligence in every plant that really is where the healing power is. And this is why we end up with pharmaceutical drugs with harmful side effects, because they break down that integrity. So what they're doing, and you know this very well, of course, I want to share it with our listening audience here, that what happens is that almost every single pharmaceutical drug comes from a plant, but they can't patent a plant.
Right.
And
Right.
so what they do is they want to go in and find the active ingredient. Then they pull out that active ingredient. So right there, all the other elements in that plant that work together synergistically with the active ingredient are left behind. Now they have to, in order to patent it, they have to chemically reproduce it. So now this is one more step that is compromising the intelligence of that active ingredient. This is just a chemical reproduction. And then, okay, you've got a plant where what's so miraculous is that even with that process of compromising the holistic intelligence of the plant, you still get a healing property. It's still there. The only problem is it comes with harmful side effects.
Like I'll just mention, even in going way back 30 years, dissertation, we did use linoleic acid by itself, isolated, bought it from a chemical company that extracted it from oil. And we use that as a control, you might say, compared to sesame oil and other oils that were digested with lipases to break down glycerides and make it easier to get across the cell membranes. Linoleic acid did show a selective effect, and previous researchers just looked at linoleic acid. They didn't look at the holistic oil, even holistic, broken down with lipases. So that was one of the advancements in knowledge that we gave to the field, is my dissertation. We showed a selective effect of sesame oil and other oils, perhaps a less selective effect, and other non-vegetable oils like mineral oil, which is used a lot topically, no effect at all on skin cells, none, no difference. The active ingredient, they said the linoleic acid, if you were to buy it, this was a popular article that we got written.
Right, that's what I wanted.
Let's Live magazine, I think I sent it to you. Let's Live magazine wrote an article, our findings, Dr. Ed Smith and I. And they said if you were to take linoleic acid and go out and buy that, I don't know if you can buy it at the pharmacy, probably not, but you never know, and use that compared to sesame oil, you'd have to use very high doses, and right away it would be very irritating and you wouldn't want to do it. And linoleic acid, as we know, is not necessarily the active ingredient. It may not be contributing that much to selectivity, that much to shelf life, penetrating ability of sesame oil. It's the synergistic effects of the sesame oil with all these components intact. So that's why we use sesame oil. And again, to answer more your question, Candace, about the curing, I've been using sesame oil for many years and I cure it myself. I buy it. You got to bring it up to boiling to get any residual water out, and then you cool it down and put it on your skin. I think that these components in there give it a very long, the same components that contribute to a long shelf life that help it prevent it from being rancid, or the same components that help it in a short period of time, allow you to bring it to a boiling point. Right. I know Chinese and Asian cultures going back thousands of years, sesame oil was used extensively in cooking and to make bakery products, to make candies, like halva and everything. The Middle East and Asians and Indians have been using sesame oil. In fact, I was reading a recent review article, and the authors were saying that we need to create more biodiversity in the world and introduce sesame oil crops to the West, because even though it takes more of a milder climate, I found that you can grow it in Iowa, according to the soybeans, which is so predominant here.
Yeah.
So it would be a very good cash crop, actually. And 50%, here's another fact, 50% of the sesame seed is sesame oil. And so you're extracting it through natural means, without having to use hexane and other chemicals, with just cold pressing is easier for sesame seeds than it would be for other oils that have a much lower amount, like corn or soybean or canola or what have you. So that's another advantage of growing sesame oil. But we often have to import it overseas, and with a limited number of, it's not really grown to large economies of scale. And if it was like corn and soybeans, I'm sure the price of a bottle of sesame would be a lot less expensive than it is today. And I think that's the future we're looking at here. I think sesame oil will become much more widely known and used, especially topically, as we're using it today.
Exactly. And speaking of topically, I really want to share with everybody the most basic way that most of us use sesame oil is in this treatment called Abhyanga. And it's just a simple oil massage where you do long strokes on the long bones and circular motions on the joints. You just do a nice covering of the body of oil, and you can do it right in your shower so you're not getting oil all over everything. And actually, it's recommended before you take a shower. And a nice layer, very thin layer, is kind of left on,
Yeah.
and that really protects the skin. It allows the skin to have more elasticity and helps it retain moisture, the water in the body. And it's just an amazingly preventive, you could even say, procedure to do on a regular basis. And John, I'm sure you've looked into the benefits of doing Abhyanga with sesame oil on a
Yeah.
regular basis. So you can share that with our audience. That's something that they can relate to.
Yeah, I've been doing it on a regular basis probably since the 1990s. I wasn't just inspired by my dissertations, but we were developing an Ayurvedic major for the first time back then. And, I also went to Panchakarma at least a dozen times back then. I started on campus.
But what do the Vajas say that it does for one's health to do an Abhyanga every day?
It slows down the aging process. That was what I didn't start till I was in my 40s. So I said, help me go through my midlife crisis here. So yeah, once I went through my very first Panchakarma, and it was incredibly a joyful process.
It is, and
I had the different 5 components of it. The Shirodhara, by the way, is probably one of the most deeply relaxing techniques I've ever experienced, where they drip for,
yeah,
across your forehead. And so I was very impressed at all the ways the sesame oil was used, everywhere from Shirodaris to Bastis, not just Abhyanga. And also, I got into dental hygiene. In addition to brushing our teeth, oil gargle, you can take just a tablespoon of sesame oil and swish around your mouth for a few minutes. And that also is very good for dental health. It helps prevent tooth decay and so forth, antibacterial properties, anti-inflammatory. In fact, I was mentioning earlier about Dr. Martha Stevens' very first study on sesame oil on dental health. She was looking at bacterial counts in petri dishes back then. And she did a study, found that there was significantly lower bacterial counts of people who were doing this Gandusha practice for a couple weeks compared to control groups who weren't, just, for example, brushing their teeth. So that was interesting. That was one of the first studies on the antibacterial properties. But in addition to the anti-cancer properties, which I did my work on, later studies look at anti-inflammatory effects. And there's a ton of
right.
studies now, some from India, some from the West, on the anti-inflammatory effects and the mechanisms of how that works. It reduces these certain inflammatory markers,
Right.
interleukins and TNF alpha, which is the necrosis factor. I won't get into biochemistry here. But all these different factors that contribute to inflammation. The anti-inflammatory effects of sesame oil neutralizes many of them. So that may explain its anti-inflammatory effects.
Yeah, it's amazing. I want to come back to, again, all these different uses of sesame oil. I'm seeing that also there's some questions about what brand to buy. We have bulk distributors for the Raj because we get so much of it. But the key thing is, of course, cold pressed. As John was just saying, that's an easy thing to do with sesame oil because 50% of the seed is oil itself. So
Right.
a cold press will really extract it. You're not using chemicals to extract it. The other thing is organic because
Right.
you don't want to have any oil that has pesticide residues or fertilizer residues because the oil is a carrier. And those things you're taking into your body. This is why it's just so important with Panchakarma treatments that no compromises are made, that everything is organic, everything is pure, everything is cured properly. Now, lots of questions are coming in here. So I'm going to just talk about the treatments a little bit that you brought up. You gave such a great description, John, of your first time having Panchakarma and having a Shirodhara. So again, there we are with sesame oil. And what's so interesting is that the Shirodhara is actually a cooling treatment. We always want to have a kind of cooling effect on the head. And yet sesame oil is in essence kind of a heating. It has a heating property. But what we do is ideally we let the Shirodhara, where we're pouring the oil rhythmically back and forth, the forehead, we allow it to be body temperature, not warmed up. Now, a lot of people say, oh, but I want it warm. And sometimes our technicians indulge them because they insist on it because it feels so good to have this warm oil on your head. But in reality, this is just a tip for those of you doing Panchakarma. It's really good, maybe just a little bit above body temperature, because then as it continues to be poured over the head, it cools down a little bit. But you feel so much more expansive when that oil isn't warm. But again, the amazing part about that treatment is that the forehead is just rich with nerve fibers. There's some major nerves and all their branches that come into that area. And so when there's that gentle, rhythmic pouring of the oil, uninterrupted for 20 minutes, back and forth, the level of relaxation that takes place. There was a woman from Town and Country magazine who came to do a report on the Raj some years ago. And when she had the Shirodhara, she described it as entering the uncharted waters beyond relaxation. I don't know where I went, but this was beyond relaxation. Yeah, it's just amazing. And now also it's penetrating the scalp and the brain. So you've got this oil that's goes all the way to the bone on the body, and so there it is, really penetrating the brain and calming the whole mental activity down. So just amazing. And then I'll just comment on one other treatment, and then we'll take a look at some of the questions here in the chat box. But there's another treatment called pizza chili, and it sounds like pizza and chili, but it is not an edible treatment. But anyway, pizza chili is a treatment where literally we use vats of oil, and it's run through a pump, and there are two hoses. And all our treatments are synchronized by two technicians working on both sides of the body at the same time, which again, what it does to the parasympathetic nervous system is very profound. Just again, that synchrony on both sides. What happens is they each have a hose coming out of the pump, which the pump is placed in a very big vat of oil, cured oil. And then as they do the Abhyanga massage, with one hand, they have the hose where they're literally pouring warm oil, starting at the toes, all the way up to the shoulders, all the way back down, on the front of the body, on the back of the body. And it is just so luxurious. You just think, I don't know if this is doing something really great for my health or not, but it's the most luxurious thing I've ever experienced in my life. But what's so amazing is it's doing incredible things to the body and resetting, rebalancing. And there again, it's that sesame oil. It is penetrating the entire body and the tissue beds. And then that's where the fat soluble toxins that are in the fatty tissue beds, they get dislodged by this oil that's penetrating deep into the tissue beds because it's sesame oil that just goes deeper than any other oil, taking the essence of the herbs with it. And as it's nourishing and healing the body, it is dislodging all the toxins, oil-soluble toxins that are lodging themselves in the lipid lining around every cell. That sesame oil is attracting them because they're oil-soluble, so they move out of the tissue beds and out of the cell lining into the stream of sesame oil that's saturating the tissue beds. That all gets moved into the bloodstream, and it then from there gets moved into the colon. And then the third use of sesame oil are the enemas. And again, this is so important because the colon is the seat of vata, and vata is a drying influence. So all these colonics and these enemas people do with water, they are drying the colon. And that's the seat of vata, and you don't want dryness there. So now we have sesame oil that's pulling all those toxins that have been loosened, all those environmental toxins, all the toxins from undigested food. It's all been moved now in the colon, where it is pulled out on a daily basis in a very gentle way. This is not a colonic. These are not a big, horrible deal. They're just doing the job. And it's sesame oil and more sesame oil. And I want to come back to what John described as, what I'm going to say Ganush, but I think that's an Italian dish. What is the word?
Yeah, I've heard it pronounced Gandusha.
Gandusha.
Someone in the audience who has clinical training in Ayurveda might help me out here.
Gandusha, I think that's right. Gandusha.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Very good for dental hygiene. Let me just tell you an experience. I went to a dentist about 3 years ago, and I had a molar that he thought was too far gone. They couldn't even do. And they said they might have to be extracted. And so 3 years has gone by, and I became much more regular in doing the Gandusha at least every other day and have no pain whatsoever. He thought that, oh, the tooth should be taken out. You're going to have pain. You're going to be coming back here in an emergency. 3 years has gone by. It hasn't happened. And I haven't changed anything. I'm still brushing my teeth. But I think it's that sesame oil. You only need, like I say, a tablespoon, swish it around a few minutes. And you do it after you brush your teeth. And I think it's really helped me save that molar.
I think it's an amazing thing. And I also often forget. And, sometimes we worry about kind of clogging up our sink drain with oil every day. But, if you just go get a little bit of liquid dishwashing soap not that you put in the dishwasher, but you wash your dishes with sometimes, and you just have it there at your sink and put a few drops in the drain and run some good hot water down that drain after you spit out your oil, after swishing it for a while, it seems to really take care of it. So those are, we have to have these little practical tips because oil does spread around everywhere, but there are ways to be able to use it because it is so beneficial. And as John was saying, it's that antibacterial property of sesame oil that is just fantastic for the gums, for the health of the teeth. And it's just a miraculous substance. That's what we can say. So, John, let's take a look at some of the questions that are in. Is cured sesame oil better for skin and body than regular sesame oil? Curing has two definitions. So we like to cure it, as John was saying, just to remove the water. And also then it's purified, it's clean. I think that's the key issue, that we want to just do that with the oil, whether we're going to then proceed to cure it with herbs or not. John, is that what you're thinking?
That is my limited understanding. You want to heat it up to at least body temperature when you put it on.
Yes.
You don't want to put it on cold. It will be slower in penetrating the skin.
Right.
Well, like I say, you want to be careful because when you're at the stove and you heat it up to, say, boiling, you got to let it cool down. Be careful not to spill it and so forth. You could get scalded. So you want to handle it carefully. But once it cools down, you can put it in a bottle and take it to your bathroom and do Abhyanga.
Sometimes I'll just fill up the sink with hot water and let it sit in the hot water in the sink, and that is just enough to heat it up. And other times, you can get those cups that have a little cup warmer, the cup warmer plugs in, and you just sit this ceramic cup on the cup warmer, and you can put your sesame oil in the cup and then take it into the shower with you. And that's a great way to warm up the oil as well. So let's see what else we have here. Wow, we have a lot of questions. We better start moving along here. Again, best sesame oil, organic, cold press. We'll have to ask Steve Boss, our food expert, what he thinks is the best. We get ours in big quantities, huge quantities. So how long to cool? You just, when you cure it, when you heat it up, you just let it cool down until put it back in a bottle. You want to just heat it up one time. Just bring it to that boil one time. And all you need to do is, when you think it's getting pretty hot, you'll see it a little kind of stream. It's sort of moving like a little current in it. You just drop a little drop of water and it'll pop. It'll almost jump off the surface of the oil. If there's a little crack when you drop a little drop of oil, then it's good. And again, so that's the reason for curing it. You kind of get the water out of it. You just purify it. And it's just that one time. And then you just want to warm it up a little bit each time that you use it. You don't have to cure it every time you're about to use it. You just put it back in your bottle. Do your suppliers have bottles in public? We make oils that people can purchase. So at the Raj, you can have a consultation with our Vaidya expert, and you can even do it over Zoom if you're far away. And then our experts will let you know what oil would be best for you, which herb, and we bottle that in our herb room. We have that available. Castor oil is another fantastic oil, but castor oil is almost impossible to work with in terms of massage. It is so thick and it's so hard to get off the body, even with soap and hot water. But it is a wonderful oil. It doesn't have the same properties, but we do use it in certain treatments. So for joints, we use it in our boluses. For Patapodali, it's called, where it's a massage with a Muslim bolus that has herbs and rice in it. It's been boiled in castor oil and turmeric and other properties that are being boiled there in the castor oil. And it's just marinating in it for a very long time. And then those hot boluses are brought into the treatment room, and we do the massage with the castor oil. But the mess that we make, we have a laundry service we send things out to, and they just say, please don't send those turmeric castor oil sheets to us. I think you better just throw them away. And I think there are actually very specific, like the what are they called? The semolina, the lignans, are they called what's the word for semolina and semolino, and those three ingredients? What are those called, John? Are they
Sesame and sesamo lignans?
Lignan. Okay, the lignan.
So, Lignans.
And those lignans are very unique to sesame oil. So there is something very special with sesame oil. And now this is a great point. Benefits of coconut oil. Sometimes that heating property of sesame oil is too much for some people. It's too heating for their physiology. Now, we still use it absolutely for the bastis, because there we're dealing with the colon. It's the seat of vata. That warming oil is absolutely what's needed. Warming in its own property, is, you could say, is a warming property, is just, it's exactly what you need. It doesn't matter if you're vata, pitta, or kapha. That's where it's needed. It's the same with the gums. But with the overall skin, sometimes it will cause a rash. And then we go to coconut oil, and coconut oil is also wonderful. We love sesame oil the best, but there are times when, for a given person, that coconut oil is the best. Okay, Shirdar is the best. We agree. But Ayurveda doesn't to be taken dietarily. Doesn't really. Okay, John, what do you have to say about eating it on as a salad oil or cooking with it? Asians
Yeah,
do.
either way, without heating and having it as part of a salad dressing is fine. A lot of studies were done over the last, say, 10, 20 years looking at consumption of sesame oil. And studies were done showing improved cardiovascular health, particularly in high risk populations like diabetics and so forth. One review was mentioning about studies that look at more of the anti diabetic effect. In other words, blood sugar control, which is another thing we didn't mention. We mentioned about antibacterial, anti-inflammatory, anti-plastic, or anti-cancer. But this is another feature that they found. But none of these studies really compared sesame oil to the more preferred oil or the more preferred cooking oil, which is ghee, clarified butter. Actually, ghee is more than clarified butter, as we know. Again, perhaps the synergistic effect. Ghee is recommended in Ayurveda to use for cooking. That is the king of oils for cooking, or king of
Right.
cooking oils.
Right.
Whereas sesame oil is the king of oils to be applied topically. And I think the reason is that ghee has very short chain fatty acids, even though they're saturated. They're very easy to digest. So ghee enhances enhances digestion. I don't know if we could say the same about sesame oil, but I know a lot of recent studies over the last 20 years have looked in high risk populations, people with chronic diseases, looking at sesame oil. There's been investigators from Middle East, investigators from India, investigators from China. Again, that's where a lot of the sesame oil crop comes from. And they have a lot of respect for sesame oil as a healthful intervention. And they saw some really good effects. But I think as far as we understand from Maharshi Ayurveda and from the Ayurvedic text, which is based on, it's best for us to stay with ghee as the best cooking oil rather than to all of a sudden convert over that to something. You can use sesame oil once in a while. I've used it once in a while for Asian stir fry. You
Right.
know, I've used it. Most of the time, I use ghee at home for cooking. And you can also use coconut oil once in a while too. Coconut oil. We did test coconut oil in our research. It wasn't quite as selective in inhibition as the sesame oil. Coconut oil has a lot of medium chain saturated fatty acids. So anyway, that's my comments there. If anyone has
Right.
anything else to add.
No, that's great. Do agree that I default to ghee for cooking also. That's fine with high heat. So good question though, and thanks for bringing that point up. And the next question is regular sesame oil or cured sesame oil for basti? We recommend always curing. Once you buy your bottle of water, just empty it out in a pan, cure it, bring it up to a boil, let it cool down, put it back in the bottle, and then just go ahead and use it, and you're just warming it up. So our oils have all been cured in the oil kitchen, then they come up to the tech wings where the technicians are dealing with it, and they're at that point, the sesame oil is cool and they just warm it up a little bit. They mix it in with all the other ingredients that are going into the basti. And yeah. And then this is a good question. Is there a difference between Gandusha and oil pulling? Nope. They're two expressions for the same.
No, exactly.
And topical application good for arthritis? Absolutely. It's great. And there are certain herbs you can get I'm not sure which one. If it's Bala. Anyway, I can go check on that too. But the sesame oil cured with a couple of herbs it's also really great for arthritis. And we have a lot of success with arthritis for those who are going through Panchakarma. They get a lot of relief from having, day after day, all that oil just completely saturating the whole physiology in the joints. And also castor oil, that Patrapotali treatment where it's with boluses that have been boiled in the castor oil boluses that have herbs and rice and all kinds of things in them. Those are also great for sesame oil. To use sesame oil on the teeth, does it have to be cured? Again, we just say cure your sesame oil once you get it, put it back in the bottle, and you don't have to do it again. It's a one-time thing. They had to replace my toilet because the sesame oil corroded the bottom so much. Yeah, could be. It's a very penetrating oil. Someone said it'll go right through linoleum if you leave it on the linoleum floor for very long. Okay. All right, John, this one is for you. John, you mentioned that sesame oil reduces progression of certain cancers. Did you see any evidence that it reduced the existing size of the carcinoma tissue? Second, what about oral? Oh, yes, oral ingestion. So we talked about that. So go ahead about the.
Yeah, I haven't come across any studies yet on the use, like treating, for example, colon cancer, which is a very bad form of cancer. It's the second cause of death, I believe, next to lung cancer. And the question then is, what's the best route to take? Should we ingest it, drink a little bit every day, or should we do an enema like a Basti? I would think that if there are clinical studies that have been done, perhaps there's some done in India that are in very popular medical journals I'm not aware of in all my searching in preparation for this webinar. But I would think that the use of colonics using sesame oil would be a very good approach, particularly if you have benign polyps started. If you have, obviously, you have advanced colon cancer, which can metastasize. You might need Western medicine to come to the rescue. But as far as early stages of colon cancer, it seems to me that having special kind of Basti using sesame oil would be beneficial.
Yeah, but this is something where you have to run this by a medical doctor.
Yeah.
Cancer is a tricky thing. It moves very quickly. And Ayurveda is very preventive. It's great for addressing chronic disorders. Cancer moves so quickly that you have to, you have to be careful. You have to be careful because
The best is best for prevention. All the aspects of Ayurveda, whether we're talking about Bastis or topical Abhyanga, is primarily for prevention. This is real primary prevention. Now, in Western science, they talk about primary prevention in
this
terms
is
of
primary, right? And
that's
also,
secondary and tertiary. This Ayurveda is real primary.
but also chronic disorders.
Yeah.
Unbelievable because most chronic disorders today that we see, the underlying cause is a vata. It's a vata imbalance. And the great thing about vata is, yes, it goes out of balance most easily, but it goes back into balance most
Right.
easily as
Right.
well. And so it's just remarkable what we can do because we're going to root cause. So we're not masking symptoms, which is what most medications do for chronic disorders to make you more comfortable. And then you deal with the side effects. So I used to be in awe of Ayurveda in regard to its ability to prevent. And since modern medicine doesn't really have a grasp on actual prevention of disease, usually it's early detection or early intervention is what they refer to as prevention. But I am, after all these years of watching people come in and out of the Raj, I am astounded at its effectiveness for chronic disorders. We're getting to noon, and I know, John, you've got another appointment. So
Yes.
these are great questions here. And what we're going to do is Marta Christie is going to capture the questions. And we are going to include, when we put the replay of this up, and all of you will have the link to the replay, we will also have written text with the answers to these questions.
And then also, if people in any of the research papers, the most recent review articles on sesame oil, or my own dissertation, anything in between, which has come out in the last 30 years, please contact me here at the Institute for Prevention Research. I work with Dr. Robert Schneider, and I'll be glad to send you a PDF file of that paper or answer any scientific questions about the scientific research, what's been done in this area, that area. No problem.
Wonderful. And
Okay.
John, one last question before we go off.
Okay.
Once we've cured the oil and we put it back in the bottle, is it better to go into the refrigerator or into the cupboard?
Yeah, that's another good question. Sesame oil is, I leave it out. I haven't heard any recommendations about having to put it right back in the refrigerator. If you buy a huge supply, it's going to last you a year. You may just take like a, a case of 12 bottles, use one bottle, keep it at room temperature, like in your bathroom, and then put the other 12 bottles in the refrigerator, something like that. It does have definitely a longer shelf life than other oils.
Right. All right. Well, everyone, thank you so much for joining us. And we really appreciate the questions. They were just great today. And there were so many of them here, and they're such good questions. So we will absolutely be talking with John and our Vaijas and make sure that we get all your answers to you. And we look forward to seeing you next month. And again, so happy to connect with all of you. And John, thank you so much. You are a true scientist, and we are so happy to have had this information. I am much more fully educated about sesame oil after reading all your papers, and really, you're a wonderful resource. And thank you again for joining us. And
Yeah, thank you for having me as a host. I really appreciate it. Candace, you've done a very good job. Okay.
okay, thank you,
Okay.
everybody.
I got to run along. Take
You-
care.
Okay, me too. Until next time, thanks for joining. Goodbye for now.